Let's talk about the difference between John and what we call the synoptics. They see the portrait or the story of Jesus from, generally speaking,
The same angle.
the same angle.
That's right.
So talk to me a little bit about that. And I remember you sharing with me how you talk to your students about this.
Well, I tell my students that, that 3 of the Gospels on purpose tell the story mostly from the earth up. And then John is the exception. It tells the story from heaven down with the beginning of John 1:1. And the difference is huge because the big question people have is that how can Jesus be this unique, what I call one in a gazillion figure, there's no one else like him, who is both divine and human all matched up? Well, one way you can tell it is from heaven down and just say at the beginning, he's God and he became incarnate. But the other way to do it...
So John starts with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
That's exactly right, and the Word became flesh. And so you know right at the beginning what you're dealing with. The other gospel writers begin differently. Mark starts with John the Baptist's ministry. We don't even know anything about Jesus' childhood. Matthew and Luke start with variations on the virgin conception, on the fact that God was responsible for the birth of this child, but it doesn't get into the person of Jesus in detail or stuff like that, and it lets the story build. And the way what I tell my students is that that's actually how everyone comes to Jesus. No one is born, gets the swat of life at the beginning, and their first words out of their mouth are, Jesus, the second person of the ontological Trinity, wah, wah, wah. No one comes to Jesus that way. Everyone has Jesus explained to them, and they move from perceiving this person who they might know is great or has a great history to perceiving eventually who it is the Bible claims him to be in terms of both this unusual mix of divinity and humanity.
So it's a gradual discovery.
Exactly
of who
right.
Jesus
And an
is.
opening up of who he is by what he does, by what he says. And you actually watch the disciples in Mark, they're bumbling and stumbling all the way to try and figure out who in the world is this guy?
I think it's Ben Witherington I read who said they are the disciples.
Exactly right. It is Ben, and yeah, he's right. They are very much the disciples. And yet, in another sense, what I try and tell students is, but that isn't surprising. You are dealing with someone who is unique out of all the people who have ever been born in the history of the world.
And God has come in a way that was really unexpected.
Exactly right. And so the Gospels are a way of unveiling that story so you can kind of begin to get your hands around it. So they start with categories we're used to. You know, Jesus is a baby. He's in a manger. He's someone who teaches. He's someone who goes in the synagogue and exhorts out of the prophets. But he's doing some other stuff that tells you, well, he's exorcising demons. Now, there were other exorcists around. But when you start to stack up everything that he's doing, he's forgiving sins. He's challenging how the Sabbath is dealt with. He is dealing with the creation. He's walking on the water. You know, and all of a sudden you realize, oh man, he's doing things, and some of these things aren't things other people do. There must be something else going on here. And you watch the disciples ask questions like, who is this then who can command the wind and the waves, and they obey him?
I thought of that story of the calming of the storm. Mm-hmm. And the response is shock and awe, really. The disciples respond by saying, what in the world is going on is really what they're saying.
Exactly right. It's beginning to dawn on them that although they thought that this figure might be the deliverer, the Messiah, some still great, significant figure in the history of Israel, they're getting much, much more than they bargained for.
Okay, now here's the question. For those of us who have been in the church for a while, we read over these stories. We're reading Mark 3 through 7 for our Bible reading, and we yawn past a story like the calming of the storm. And what you're saying is that part of reading the Gospels is to enter into the story in a way that we are discovering along with them who Jesus is?
Absolutely, and even more than that, as you think about what these stories mean, not only to you, because you're used to hearing the stories, but what they might mean to someone who's hearing it for the first time or doesn't know very much about Jesus, someone you might have a conversation with about Jesus. You need to realize how much they're being asked to buy, if you will, as they're reading this. And sometimes what we do when we share the story is we back up the dump truck and dump it on them. We, beep, 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 boom.
Give them
We
the whole theology,
whole
all at one
theology,
time.
all when we ask them to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And in fact, what the Gospels do is teach us how to tell the story gradually. And if we can pick up how to teach and tell the story gradually, we can actually help ourselves in talking to our friends and neighbors who might not know Jesus from another great religious teacher and might not appreciate how distinctive he really is.